Disclaimer, trigger warning. The We Are One podcast aims to shed light on the abuse experience within the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. The stories shared are from survivors who bravely recount their personal experiences. It is important to note that unless an abuser has been convicted in a court of law, they are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The podcast does not serve as a legal judgment, but rather as a platform for survivors to share their truth. Welcome to the We Are One podcast. Let's jump right into today's episode. Here's your hosts, Olivia and Jennifer.
Welcome back to the We Are On podcast. I'm your host, Olivia.
And I'm Jen.
And on today's episode, we have a guest named Eleanor. Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Hey, Eleanor.
Very tired, but here we are. We're doing it at 8:30 at night. This is true dedication, people. No, I'm just kidding. So we're really excited to deep dive into your experience and your story. I know that you have a lot of different ways that you can bring awareness for people out there that are wanting knowledge about the IFB. So I guess like where we could start is where were you like born?
I was born in Beaumont, Texas.
Okay. And how old are you?
I'm 35.
Okay. So I feel like we ran into the same pattern where either most people are born and raised in the IFB and this is all they've ever known, or it was so and so brought me to church and that's how I got into the IFB. So I'm curious, how did you or your family get involved with the IFB?
I am one of the born into types. I mean, we went back and forth between like regular Baptist or non-denominational and IFB throughout. My family moved between Texas and Colorado several times, and that changed where we went to church. But yeah, I was pretty much born into it. My parents had gone to Bill Gothard seminars before I was born.
Okay, yeah, and that is the IBLP, right? Yeah, okay. And that's like a lot of people only know it like because like the Duggars, and stuff like that. And obviously he's well known, but there is a difference in some ways, but most of it is similar with IFB, but there is differences. I think a lot of people see the similarities with like the umbrella, they talk about the umbrella. IFB does the same thing. So there is a lot of similarities, but there is differences. So how was your experience going to an IFB church though?
So my parents started going to this IFB church in Beaumont, Texas called Westwood Bible Church. And they went with my grandparents, so my dad's parents. And my dad's father had a Catholic background and his mom had like a more of a Methodist background. They had kind of come back to Christianity more strongly when my dad was 10 years old when they went to a revival in the 50s in New York, and then they'd also moved between New York and Texas. And so they had kind of gotten worried about a lack of what they saw as traditional Christian values in the church in the 60s, and kind of got, I think, scared into attending an IFB church. And that's how they ended up at Westwood Bible Church. And I think my parents went there for 11 years or so. They ended up switching to a regular Southern Baptist church when I was 2 weeks old. But that's where, like, there's pictures of my baby shower that are in the IFB church. And there's a little Bible that I have that says to baby skeleton, because they didn't know what my name was yet, or if I would be a boy or a girl or whatever. So yeah, so like I was like born into it, and then my parents were usually the more conservative fringe members of any regular church, if that makes sense. Even in a non-denominational or Southern Baptist that's not as conservative, we were the weird homeschool denim wearing people over in the corner.
Yeah.
Wait, you got to wear denim?
Yes. Remember the homeschool stereotype? Like we were wearing the weird denim jumpers.
I'm just saying, I know some IFB people, they were not allowed to wear denim. But denim was bad in some IFB places.
It wasn't like, the jeans. Sometimes the jeans were allowed if it was deemed more modest, but yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I got to wear whatever I wanted in that way. Like my parent, like I was never a skirt only person. I mean, I wear pants, I wear shorts. But like when I went to activities and stuff, I usually did wear a denim skirt because it would match things different, easier. Or if like I was at a youth rally, it would be easier to put a t-shirt on with a denim skirt compared to, well, then eventually we went to culottes, but that's a whole other story. And then when I got into high school, a lot of people switched to like the black skirt only mindset. Like I remember being like, Mom, I need my black skirt like clean. I don't want to wear the denim, like that was like a no. Like, I don't know, it was so weird.
Does Pensacola have a rule against wearing denim skirts? You could only wear like, I remember reading their dress code at one point, and we watched all the Abeka Academy videos, so I knew what the kids wore, and it wasn't usually denim skirts.
Yeah, I don't believe we were allowed to wear denim at Bob Jones either.
Later in one of the later handbooks, but it was like
Yeah.
for a while it was only in the dorms. It was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I do know Heartlands, but not like because like I didn't go. Like I mean, I went there for a week, and I wore a denim skirt actually, just one of the classes. So, but then again, I also wasn't student, but maybe that's why. I don't know. I mean, I would like to say that they were, cool with denim. I feel like I've seen though, like people I know that went to Heartland like have denim. So I don't know. I guess people who went to Heartland can correct me or not, but I think they're allowed to, but I could be wrong. So you were the stereotypical homeschooling, like you said, denim family who stood out. How did that, I guess like looking back, how did that affect like other things? Because like some people, like I have a family in my mind, like that I could just imagine how your family was from like my former IFB church, and there was a lot of bullying that happened because they were like the weird homeschool kids. So I'm curious if that's what you had to go through too.
Well, when we were at the IFB churches, we fit in a lot more. We were with our fellow weird people and also dressed that way. um, but whenever we were in, so like we went to like my church history is all over the place. So was a baby at Westwood Bible Church. Then my parents went to First Baptist Church of Beaumont, which was regular Southern Baptist. And those people sent their kids to public school or private school or what have you. And there was only a couple other homeschooling families. So we very much did stand out. And didn't really look like everyone else did in the late 90s necessarily. And then we moved to Western Colorado in 1999, and we went to we went from a town of like 100,000 people to a tiny town of 800 people. And the church was like 100 people, and it was non-denominational. There was all different types of people there, Catholics, Methodists, all these backgrounds. My parents were still pretty like Baptist. Um, and like there was just like a mix of beliefs because it was such a small town, and that was like the church to go to. And there was some more charismatic. My parents would be like, well, this is what like we believe, and other people believe that you can take communion at any age, but we believe it's like should be like after you're 12 years old or so when you like really understand it. So they would kind of share with me some of the differences with like doctrinal beliefs and stuff like that among denominations. And then we were there for 2.5 years, and then we went to Dallas area. And that's where we started going to Rockwell Bible Church. We visited a bunch of churches, but they were mostly like mega churches. And my parents really didn't feel at home in them. And they were looking for that community connection. And then we found an IFB church, and my mom was like, oh, good. This is like our IFB church back in Beaumont. And here we are again. And so then I ended up going to Rockwell Bible Church and Grace Bible Church in Colorado Springs, because we kept moving back and forth between Texas and Colorado. But by that point, so like all my later teens, early to late teens, we were in the IFB.
Okay, interesting. So did you have anything that you wanted to add about like your experience in the Gothard movement?
I noticed that anytime my mom would say that like Bill Gothard was a smart person and she'd heard his seminars when she was going to like I think her parents were going to a fairly conservative independent Baptist church. where she was married in the Houston area when she was like a young person. So she would mention him from time to time. We had some of his booklets, but not like a lot of them. Most of what I learned theologically was from Bob Jones' homeschool curriculum or Pensacola Christian College, Abeka Academy homeschool curriculum. But I realized later how much, especially for some of their like Bible doctrines books and Bible curriculum, Abeka Academy draws from Bill Gothard. There's like pieces where they actually cite directly from him. And I've been wanting to write some blog posts on that because there's a lot of interconnection. And anytime we were in an IFB church, I would hear Gothard's name come up a lot. So even though they're like very much separate entities, there seemed to be a lot of interconnection there for some reason.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Actually, I can agree to that, or like I can like relate, I meant, because my mom and I, when we watched Let Us Pray, and then also Happy Shiny People or whatever that was,
Mhm.
when we first watched it with like the Duggars and stuff like that, because I remember watching it like, oh my God, there's people on the TV that look like us. Wow. You know, like, so we would watch the Duggars and be like, wow, this is great. This is awesome. You know, there's normal people. Yeah. Anyway, and so I remember telling my mom, like, yeah, my there's quite a few people who I know who's made like their daughters listen to the seminars that, you know, so like that name, you know, and she's like, oh, I've never heard of, you know, oh, I don't think I've ever heard of, you know, the pastor saying that, blah, blah. And I was like, I mean, he might not have, but other staff people do. So there is, again, like I said, there's a lot of similarities with them and there's also differences. And so I always say they're just two different, or they're not two different cults, but they are two different cults in that way.
They seem to like rely on each other or feedback on each other in weird ways that you wouldn't expect. Like when I had left the IFB church in Colorado Springs after, so basically when my parents tried to force me to go to Bob Jones and I was like, no. And they were like, okay, we'll kick you out. I was like, cool. I think I'd rather be kicked out. That sucks, but I think I'd rather experience that. And then I really wasn't allowed to talk to my siblings much for 2 years after that. And the pastor at our IFB church, who was a Bob Jones alumni, told me that I was following Satan. And I knew that I was no longer welcome at the church at that point because he was using, he didn't say you can't come back, but he used all the like church discipline-y language. And so I was pretty clear from the subtext what that meant. And he was like, I have nothing more to say to you. You've chosen to follow Satan and not God's will for your life, to go to Bob Jones. And he like walked out on me in the middle of a conversation. So I was like sobbing in the sanctuary. And I told my mom when she came to check on me, she was like, what happened? And I said, you realize you made it so I can't come back here. Like you were trying to convince the pastor to convince me to do what you want. And this is where we are now. And anyway,
How
but
old were you when that happened?
I was 23.
Okay.
Yeah. And so about a year later, I wanted to connect with some of my friends who went to the IFB church in Dallas, and they invited me to a single women's conference run by Biblical Discipleship Ministries. So that's Job Martin and his two older daughters. And then I think the Malley sisters were part of it from the Bright Lights Ministry. They're like another name that's known in fundamentalism land. And they're unmarried young women, and this was like 10 years ago. So they're probably in their 40s and 50s now, but at the time they were like in their 30s and 40s. And they were very proud to tell you like they'd never been on a date, never been kissed or anything. So, but it was like, you know, everyone has to go through my dad, and this is how this works. And they did this single women's conference, and the conference was so weird. It was like, by the way, guys, married women are more depressed than single women. So be happy that you're single, even though you're supposed to want to be married. And I don't know, it was really bizarre, but I really just wanted to see my friends. It was hosted in Big Sandy, Texas at Alert Academy, which is one of Bill Gothard's main headquarter centers. And I remember driving up and I was calling one of my like normal friends from college and I said, hey, I'm going to see my friends from the cult and I'm going to this weird church conference. And I pulled up and I was like, something's wrong with this place. I don't like it. And I didn't even know it was owned by Bill Gothard's ministry at that point. I was just like, something is off. And then I found out it was actually owned by another cult before IBLP acquired that property. It was owned by like the Children of God cult. And one of my coworkers was like, oh yeah, I went there for a conference for my cult. And I was just like, what is happening?
What?
Yeah, so it had been owned by another high control religious group before being acquired by IBLP. And one of my coworkers in Colorado had happened to go there. And when she saw the pictures on Facebook that I had posted, she was like, oh yeah, I remember this place.
Oh, wow.
So weird. Anyway.
Wow. Okay, I just want to do a plug for those who are not familiar and want to deep dive a little bit more into the Bill Gothard movement. There is a documentary called Happy Shiny People or Shiny Happy People. Shiny Happy People. Go look it up. This will give you a really good indication as to what Eleanor is talking about when she's talking about the cult that the Bill Gothard movement was. It will blow your mind, you guys. And if you've seen the Duggar family, anything about the Duggar family, they were part of that cult. And as you can see, you can just Google the Duggar family. There's so much scandal going on within that family. It's just ridiculous. There was a lot of scandal going on with Bill Gothard as well. So yeah, that is just, and then the Children of God thing, that I believe there's a documentary on that too.
I think so. And I know that like my coworker was like, well, it was weird, but it wasn't like totally a cult, but my brother thinks it was a cult.
It was a cult. It was definitely a cult.
I was like, from what describing it, I was like, no, that's a cult.
Yeah.
But she had like these mixed, as an adult who was no longer religious, she had these like mixed feelings about it and was trying to like still sort it out herself.
Through, yeah, still working through the brainwashing, right?
Yes.
I think my favorite thing I've gotten told so far on the like feedback from people who are in the IFB, like that knows me personally, they're like, you know that IFB is not really a cult. Like, you know, we're not, you know, the pastor doesn't say you do. No, they do. Okay, first off, they do. And it is a cult. I think, I mean, I so like strongly believe it's a cult. And I tell people like legit born and raised in a cult. And people are like literally, we were in the airport and my mom and I are talking about like, okay, when I get back from vacation, like me and Jen are gonna record this and we're gonna do this and this and that. And we're talking in the bathroom, okay? And some lady comes out of the bathroom stall and she's like, oh, you have a podcast? I was like, okay, yes, I do. Hello. And she's like, oh, what's it about? And I was like, well, and my mom looks at me and I just start laughing. I was like, she was like, you know, we were in a cult. And she's like, and I was like, but it's not like the cults that you're drinking the Kool-Aid and die type of cult. It's like Mormonism. And she's just laughing and she whispers, she's like, oh, I know what you mean. I grew up Mormon. I was like, oh, okay, girl. And so
Okay, yeah.
I told her about the documentary and everything. And she was like, okay, I am really interested. And I was like, yeah, but like people, it just cracks me up, like, you know, word of mouth type of thing. I thought I was going to text you that, Jen, that happened. But yeah,
But that's hilarious.
Out of the bed. You have a podcast? I was like, yes, like scared, like hello. And then my mom and I like looked like, how did we word that we were in a cult? Yeah, we were in a cult. Like
Yeah.
no, yeah, it's oh gosh, to people like definitely strangers who don't know me, they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, let me trauma dump you. Here's 20 years of my life, because I've been out for 4 years, but here's 20 years of it. Here you go. So okay, so you obviously went to Bob Jones. Can you talk about your experience there? Because I was waiting for somebody for college, like I did the College Madness series, and I was like hoping somebody from Bob Jones, and then there was just so many people from Hiles, and it was just overwhelming. So
yeah, I really only went on a tour, and then I went when my siblings were going there. But they were trying to convince me that I should totally transfer from my accredited university. I had done a crazy amount in college because I did summer classes and I was double majoring in English and chemistry and I was doing research. this is at my public university where I lived at home with my parents for the first 3 years of college, here in Colorado Springs. And I went to Bob Jones and my parents were like really concerned because I had friends who weren't Christian at, my college and friends who were gay. And I was reading Harry Potter and they were like, this is a crisis and we're going to send you to Bob Jones. And I was like, okay, I don't think it's a crisis, but cool. And I'm
Yeah.
nervous, so I was the first one to start like kind of like questioning in a very like good kid kind of way, but I was like starting to sort through some things and finding myself being more like generically evangelical than fundamentalist at that point in college and kind of avoiding going to my IFB church very much because I wasn't really comfortable attending with my family. A lot of times I felt like I couldn't like emotionally connect in a worship service when my dad was around, kind of like he sucked the air out of the room. And I struggled with that for like a long time. I felt like I couldn't emotionally open up around my dad because like he was verbally abusive a lot of times and emotionally controlling. Um, where was I going with that? Bob Jones.
Do you think that he was like that mainly because he was kind of taught to be like that through like the Gaitherd ministry? Like that, I know that they teach like the husband and the father are like right underneath Bill Gaitherd or the pastor, and then there's God. Even though, do you think like he got a lot of that from that cult, or do you think that he was just like that?
Yes and no. My dad is honestly like I'm neurodivergent. I'm ADHD and autistic, and my dad probably is too. Although he wasn't really in the generation that was diagnosed, and so part of his like he has OCD too. And like, I mean, I have been diagnosed this year and with official OCD, and I'm pretty sure he has it too. He's just like, oh no, this has to happen a certain way. And he thinks if you don't do it that way, it's not right. And he'll even like stand over you while you like pour a glass of water. I'll be like, I'm gonna pour it for you so that it's right. And so some of that is just him. But I mean, some of it, yeah, he would be like, you don't respect me anytime my mom disagreed with him. Um, and then she would be like, well, I feel like you treat me like a doormat. And then he would get really mad. And instead of listening to her, he would just get like butthurt and run away for a while and storm off. And then my mom would have to like submit to him. And now it's like somewhat better, like, because I can actually go to my dad and be like, hey, like the other day, I was like, okay, I am not doing well mentally. I'm very overwhelmed with trying to move apartments and all this stuff that's going on right now. I need to talk to my mother and I need you to let us have a conversation for like the next 30 minutes and not interrupt us. And he was like, I'm going to time it. And I'm like, okay, look, I need you to give me time with my mother and she will give you the summary version later because he can't handle like all the details. And I like stood up for myself and said exactly what I needed. And I wasn't afraid of him being mad anymore, partly because he's older and partly because I can leave the house. Like I live somewhere else. So if he's mad, I can just let him be mad and I can walk out of the situation. So it's a lot of things. It's partly some of his very unique quirks that he has these like blind spots where he just truly doesn't see how it alienates people and shuts people down because he'll be like, why doesn't my kid want to hang out with me? And then we'll say like, well, it's really hard to talk to you about XYZ things because of how you act. And he's like, oh. And it's like, truly did not understand, did not see it. But they're like, I mean, yeah, my mom believed a lot of the if I submit, it will make everything better type of idea, which didn't actually help. And it wasn't until all of us were like grown up and started telling my mom, look, like, you need to stand up for yourself. It hurts us when you don't. and we hate seeing this happen, and we hate this for you, and we hate seeing you be this miserable, that she finally actually started like pushing back with my dad. So I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, um, I ended up on this trip on the 4th of July to Bob Jones. And one of my friends texted me, was like, "Happy Day of Freedom. You get to go to Bob Jones, like the anti-freedom place."
Oh, yeah.
And it was really weird. I didn't like how it felt like all the buildings smelled kind of moldy, and like they were from the 60s and had not been renovated really at all. And I felt like I was stepping back in time, but in like a bad way. And I don't know, you went in the biology department and stuff, and they had all these like dead specimens everywhere. And I just had the weirdest feeling, like, if I go to this college, I feel like I'm gonna end up a dead specimen, like in a glass.
Oh, wow.
It all felt like a metaphor for something. And I was like, I really, look, I had already started going to like more evangelical churches, trying to branch out, and I didn't want to be kicked out of the IFB like I was, but I was trying to like explore other avenues for spirituality and Christianity, and listen to contemporary Christian music, which hadn't been allowed in my IFB churches and stuff like that, and open up a little bit. And I felt like, no, this makes me feel like I'm going right back into everything I'm trying to pull away from. I don't like this at all. And then we went to the chemistry professor, and we talked to this really nice guy, and I told him about the research I'd been doing, and I showed him the like honors research class I'd been in. And I said, "Okay, so I don't understand though, if I come and finish my degree here and transfer, which means I'll have to take a bunch of Bible classes that weren't offered at UCCS, that are only offered at Bob Jones, and I'll have to do all this extra stuff that I wouldn't have to do if I stayed at my university, right? And then I go from accredited to unaccredited. So how do I go to grad school? Because I want to go to grad school." And the professor was really nice. He said, "Well, we always just pray with our grad school applicants, that they'll get in." And I was like, I don't I don't like that answer. Like, it felt very like hopes and prayers for our graduate students. And then I actually ended up going to school with a guy who had gone to Bob Jones for undergrad and was doing his master's in chemistry at my college the next
Okay.
year. And he said, yeah, it was harder to get into graduate programs coming from an unaccredited school. So, I
So
mean,
how do you feel like, you went through you've been in the IFB, you went through homeschooling, you went through the Bill Gothard movement, you went through all of that. So how would you say that like your experience has affected maybe your faith or your relationship with like church in general or God? Where are you now with all of that?
so I did end up reconnecting with my first church, Beaumont's First Baptist Church. And that was back in 2013, 2014. So not long after I was kicked out. And that's because, so you were asking before we started, talking more about like childhood and how those different things like affected me. So when I was a little kid, from like 2 to 9 years old, this church, that when we had left Westwood Bible Church and gone to Beaumont's First Baptist, they had a Easter play every year called the Beaumont Passion Play. And they rented out the downtown theater, and people came from all these churches around and would pack the whole theater and see it. And I am autistic, and I take things very literally. And as a kid, I took things very literally. So when my parents would go to this play with me and be like, "This literally happened," I'm like, "Okay." And then they would be like, "Well, you disobeyed us and you aren't going to get ready for bed quickly enough and we have to spank you. But, you know, we're just spanking you and Jesus was crucified for like your disobedience. And I was thinking in my mind, you mean like that guy at my church that like gets beaten once a year and hangs on the cross, you know? Um, and so I got to where like every time I would see him, that guy who played Jesus at church, I just like wouldn't look at him. I would be like, oh,
Wow.
he's gonna look at me. I just knew it. He was gonna look at me like I hated, like he hated me or something, because like I felt like I caused him to be hurt, even though I knew it was a play. I knew it wasn't real, but I was also told that that really happened to a real person.
Mhm.
And that was the basis like of our faith, right?
Mhm.
And so there was even a time I was like 9 years old and we were like after candlelight service, like Christmas Eve candlelight service. And my parents were talking to somebody and they hardly ever let me leave their side. But because I was also like really short, so I looked younger than my age a lot of times. But my mom was like, okay, like I'm talking, you take the candles and take them over to the usher and they'll put them away after the service. So I was like, I get to go do something and I don't have to be holding my parents' hands. And I was like really happy. So I went skipping all the way over to the end of the pew. And then I saw who was holding the box to collect the candles. And it was Mark, the guy who played Jesus. And I froze. And he was talking to another adult. And I was like, I can't go over there. He's going to look at me like I murdered him.
Oh no.
I took this so seriously and I was like, what do I do? But if I go backward, mom's going to ask me why I didn't go. So I tiptoed up there and threw the candles in the box and ran away. And I told a friend about that in college because she was asking me why I liked theater. And I said, well, when I was a kid, there was this Easter play that we went to like every year almost from when I was 2 to 9 years old. And I love parts of it deeply, but also parts of it were really scary to me. And I still have nightmares about it sometimes. And she said, you know, I really feel like you should find that guy who played Jesus and talk to him. And I was like, for real? Wouldn't he think I was weird? And then he's going to think I killed him. And my friend was like, no. Like, she's like, Eleanor. And I was like, fine. I'll try, I guess. But I was like scared to death. And on that same trip that I went to connect with my IFB friends at the Single Women's Conference, I wanted to see them, but I also used it as an excuse to road trip to Texas because then I just had to drive 3 more hours south to get to Beaumont. So I got there and I knocked on the door of the church office and I was like, hi, I was baptized here when I was 5 years old and I'm just in town visiting my aunts like a totally normal person. And I was just wondering if this guy, Mark, is available or if he's busy. And he was a pastor there. At that point, he was an executive pastor, not like the preaching pastor. And they were like, oh yeah, he's in a meeting, but like, we'll go get him. And I didn't know if they would come get me or what was gonna happen next. Next thing I knew, the door opened and it was Mark. And I was just like, hi. Because I didn't know what to say. Like, dude who played Jesus when I was a child.
Oh
And
my
he was like really nice. And
God.
he was like, do you want to come back to my office and chat? And so we did. And it turned out the church was actually kind of moving away from a lot of the problems that are present in the Southern Baptist Church at large. They were moving towards like more connection with community and more like, I mean, kind of like evangelical churches are like, let's just do life together, but like they actually wanted to mean it. They wanted to like eat together and then have discussions and actually live out loving other people and loving your neighbor. And I thought, this is really cool. I have not seen this from hardly any churches I have been to. And I do remember out of all the churches I went to as a kid, I liked this church the best and the one in Ridgeway the best. Those were the ones that felt safest to me, not the IFB churches. And so I started talking to them more and more, and I reconnected with his wife Bunny and his daughter who had been in Sunday school with me as a little kid. And ended up moving back to Texas after I'd been out of my parents' house for 3 years and I had finished college. And then ended up working in journalism down there. And I went to that church until this last year. And then there were some leadership changes, and there's been kind of a political shift that I wasn't really comfortable with, that was kind of away from the really positive shift I had seen. So I actually moved back to Colorado Springs. And I'm looking at maybe going to a church up here. I find myself wanting to be more in progressive Christian spaces, and more accepting, the ones that want to live out the loving justice and mercy and like those kind of things, and actually like benefiting your community, doing tangible things. Those are the churches that I really like. And that's what my church did for a long time. Like after Hurricane Harvey, we mudded out houses together, and we had a whole like whiteboard, and we write down all these addresses, and it didn't matter if they were a church member or not. Like we just go help them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool.
I think that's how I feel with church. Like my best friend goes to a Baptist church, and I went, like I've been, I was just there a couple days ago, and I like it. Like I actually like it. I'm like, even though it has a Baptist name, and I actually say like I'll never go to a Baptist church. Granted, I was visiting, but I was like, I can see why she likes it, because it's completely different than what we were raised in, like it's just like, there's drums on the stage, like, that would,
Exactly.
they would have fallen over. So I can see it. And now, the pastor does have more of like Baptist I don't know. He has like this little Baptist like swag about him. Like he, I just like, I feel like I'm like, okay, but he's not like IFB or anything like that. And so I've had to really distinguish like, okay, IFB versus other things. I go to a non-denomination church, and I love it. I love that I can go in shorts, I can go in whatever, and nobody is looking at me like you're about to burst in flames and you need to leave. And I just love that, and I think it's really helped me realize God's love and God's promises and what his word actually says versus what we have been taught our whole life. Mm-hmm. And it's been really eye-opening personally for me to figure out, what do I believe? Okay, I believe this, and how was that portrayed when I was growing up versus what really is God's word? And it's still a struggle. There's things that in the Bible, like I read, I'm like, ooh, I don't know, like, but I'm like, honestly, I feel like the old standards creep in, and I'm like, no, that's not what that means, and it's just man-made standards. And I talked about this on season 1, when I went to a non-denomination church, I mean, immediately was like, oh God, what am I doing? I'm not used to this, 2 years out of church, what the heck? And I remember seeing somebody in jeans, and I'm like, oh, she is in jeans. And I'm like, no, it's fine. I'm like, just stop it, don't be, it was hard to get out of that mindset. And then their worship obviously is completely different than, I mean, I'm used to singing, oh, how I love Jesus and the old rugged cross, and we're over here singing modern day Christian music. And it was so like refreshing though at the same time. But I remember saying, my whole entire life, definitely my youth years, I always heard like, these mega churches, they don't care about you. They're here for your money. You go there, you're not a real Christian. You're going to hell, all that mindset. And you really believe that when you're getting told that. And that, I really feel like the IFB really believes that they're going to be like the only church people in heaven. And it's so funny to me, but whatever.
Yes, some of them do believe that.
And I remember saying, like, if the pastor covers at least, a couple things, then I'll come back. And within 20 minutes, or maybe even less than, I was like, ding, ding, ding. But what got me was when the pastor flat out said, he was like, I don't really dress up, unless it's like Easter. And he wasn't even dressed up, but whatever. And he took off his jacket, and it was a white shirt. And I think I will post a clip in this, because it just speaks so many volumes. So I will put this in there for people to see it. But
some of you have been sitting there, it's been hard for you to listen to me because of my suit jacket. Let me just get real. Some of you have never seen me in a suit jacket before. Which, if you see me in a suit jacket, it's because somebody's getting married or buried. Ain't nobody getting married today. So, you know what's coming. Hey, don't look at exterior. See, regardless of what my jacket might look like, my shirt is actually much more accurate. Some of you are really relieved right now. My shirt is actually a much more accurate representation of what's going on the inside. And actually, this isn't just an illustration. This is me. There isn't anybody here that is a worse sinner than me. There isn't anybody here that needs God's grace any more than I do. And the longer I teach this stuff, the more he reveals to me my need.
Here I am as a pastor, and this is what I deal with. Like, I know better than you. And I love when, honestly, I don't remember like when he said it, it just has stuck with me. When he was like, I am a pastor. I'm not a therapist. I am a pastor.
Now, I also want you to know that I'm not a doctor. All right, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not even a very good counselor. Don't tell anybody I said that. But those of you who've come to me for counseling, you'd probably agree, like, yeah, you're not so great, right? That's just had better advice from the fortune cookie. That's actually more true than I want to admit, all right? So I'm none of those things. I am a human being, and I'm a pastor, and I've been through this. I've experienced.
He was like, and I was like, thank you. Because there is a huge difference between just pastor and therapist, and people abuse that, and we've seen it firsthand.
Absolutely.
So
yeah. Kudos to your pastor, Olivia, for recognizing that and saying that, because that right there, that's a dime. That is like it's unheard of. I mean, literally.
Well,
like,
you'll have to come to Indy, and then you'll just go with me.
Yeah, there you go. So I have a question for both of you guys.
Oh God. Okay.
Now, you're really truly not an IFB member unless you have autographs in your Bible.
I do.
See where they would like, the pastor would be, or the preacher would be like at the end of the aisleway, and then people would literally go up and have them sign their Bible like an autograph.
Did you do that, Eleanor? No, you never did.
Although my church did give us, like when we learned to read in first grade, they gave us all like copies of NIV Bible, my first church when I was a little kid. And an old lady would do calligraphy inside and do your name, and it would say presented to, and then it would put your whole name at First Baptist Church, Beaumont, Texas, on the day. That was pretty cool. But no, we didn't do the autograph thing. I've heard of that, but that always seems so like egotistical to me. There
were pastors that would like literally like preachers or evangelists would line up.
Yeah, it can't
line up to get. It's a thing.
Signatures in the Bible. I look back.
We did have we did do a thing where like people could sign hymnals. Like when a family was going to move away, everyone would give them a hymnal from the church, and everyone signed on their favorite hymn and wrote why it was their favorite. But that's different. Like I feel like that's kind of cute. And I've even like had people do that. Like I went and had like all the people who like were important to me in my life sign their favorite song in the hymnal.
Yeah, that's different. I feel like with the Bible though, like we're literally going around like they're a celebrity, like they're God. Like I remember being junior high. David McCracken, can you please sign my Bible? Like I literally have it. I like want to get up. I just don't know where it's at. You guys have to highlight things at camp?
Oh yeah.
Eleanor, did you?
I actually wasn't allowed to go to camp.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about that for a second. Why couldn't you go to camp?
Well, there was like a preteen camp, but my parents were like super against us. Like I actually didn't sleep anywhere away from my parents for a night until right before I moved out. And I was in my 20s at that point.
Which makes sense given the fact that there's like a lot of abuse in these organizations. So I get that as a parent now myself. I get it. Um,
I felt left out, but like looking back, I'm like, well, I think my parents are actually onto something that a lot of other people were not. Oh, and I wanted to jump back to one thing that you had said about your pastor saying like he's not a therapist. Um, so the pastor who played Jesus, Mark, when I was a kid, he actually started going to school to become a counselor. And there was another guy who was on staff of the church who was a licensed counselor. And so people who had like marriage problems or whatever, they could go talk to him. If they, if they wanted to talk to the pastor, they could, but they could also talk to a licensed counselor who was like paid by the church.
oh, awesome.
Yeah. And so then that guy was starting to retire. So Mark started going to school to be a counselor. And while he was doing that, he had to get like, because when I went to college, I didn't really have money for going to therapy, and so a lot of times I would go to this clinic where students were getting their hours while they were training to become counselors, so they were doing like the student intern form of counseling. And so Mark was doing that for a while, and he said, would you like to do counseling sessions with me? Once he started to like realize a lot of because I was going to him with a lot of stuff like, okay, so I was told this by IFB pastors, what does it really mean? And I was going to him and the head pastor about that a lot, and he was like, would you want to like talk about some of these things more, because I need counseling hours anyway? And I was like, yeah, sure. I was also still at a place where I couldn't really afford therapy copays, and he got the hours and I got the counseling. And I got to talk to him about a lot of things, and I told him about how sometimes I still have nightmares about you being tortured. I know that's like kind of awkward from this play.
Yeah.
um so then he finished school, and then he became a for real counselor. And at that point, he said, he basically talked to me and he said, I've realized, I think I probably shouldn't be your counselor anymore. We should probably be friends. But like, I'm glad I was able to help you. And because, once he went to being fully licensed, it was a little different.
Mhm.
But he used a lot of the psychology courses to counsel me as like a pastor, but also in a learning to be a counselor way.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we're still really good friends. He's like a dad person to me, and his wife's like another mom person. And I go to them a lot with like for life advice and stuff. But he actually went through the training to become a therapist, and then last year he retired from being a pastor at the church, and now he just has a counseling business.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so he's actually just a therapist now.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool that you were talking about that, because I was like, yes, I think Mark would agree that they're not the same thing. Like, it's good if you have the tools for both, but like, don't conflate the two.
Correct. Right.
I went to him and the head pastor a lot, Moody, for like I would tell him like, well, I said, okay, what do you think Philippians 2 means? Because I know I memorized it, like in the King James Version, like we had to read, about like being found in the form of God. He found it not something to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation and took upon him the servant, was made in the likeness of men, and all this stuff. The whole list, the whole shebang that I memorized back in Rebecca. And so he was doing like Mark was doing like a home group study on Philippians, and I said, okay, I have a question. What does that actually mean? Because in the IFB, I got the impression that it meant you could never like be proud of anything you accomplished, because like Jesus gave up godhood to sacrifice himself for everyone. So like if I won awards as a journalist, or I did these different things, I couldn't like be proud of them. And he was like, no, that's not what that means at all. And I was like, what? I just like looked at him funny, and he was like, no, it means like you are going to be Christ to people and do what Christ would do in loving other people.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean like you can't be happy when like you accomplish something.
Right.
And I had all these things like all the time. I would go to him and be like, okay, I don't like this one Bible verse. Can you explain to me what it actually is supposed to mean to like normal people? And he would laugh and he'd be like, sure. He's like, here's what I think it means.
Well, that's really good that you were able to do that and have somebody that was able to kind of guide you in understanding, getting a better understanding of the scripture, because like we were talking in the last interview, that a lot of times in the IFB churches, these pastors and these deacons and teachers, leaders in the church will give their own interpretation of the Bible that really isn't what it says at all. And, kind of skew God's word to fit their narrative or fit whatever, they think that people should be doing. And, I think it's really good that he was able to give you clarity on that and kind of help you in that way too. So at this point, do you still have a relationship with God at this point? Do you still go to church, or what does that look like now for you, your spiritual journey?
Well, so when Mark and his family, when he decided to basically leave the church and just be a counselor last year, things got really awkward at my church afterwards, and there had been some weird political shifts anyway.
Okay.
Really, like they had really done a really good job for a long time of, hey, we're not going to let politics get into like our sermons, and we're just going to focus on here. We've done a really good job of like, we're going to mud up people's houses. We're going to, help people. We're going to get people connected to resources in the community, things like that. And recently, a lot more politics have been creeping into the sermon. And they'd also had like the mayor come speak during a church service, along with the school superintendent for the school district I worked for, and some political people. And it made me really uncomfortable. And that was like right after Mark and his family had left too. And I
Okay.
sensed that they were probably also uncomfortable with some of the shifts. And so I basically didn't feel, I felt like my safe church that I had loved since I was a child.
Yeah.
And that I got to write an article about for the newspaper when we had the 150th anniversary. This place that I love a lot was not safe for me anymore, unfortunately.
Okay.
And so then I moved back to Colorado Springs, and due to some other stuff going on with my job and stuff like that. And I've been visiting some churches here. I still like, I have trouble with certain topics. Certain topics will give me panic attacks still to this day.
Yeah.
Like I went to this one church downtown and they were doing like a new membership service, and they were having the people who were current members introduce how they met the new members, which was really cool. Because it got you to like know their backstory. But then they sang this song that was really accepting, that was like, we are I forget what it was exactly, but it was like, all are welcome here, I think was what it was called. And it was nice. And I had a panic attack because I'm used to like people saying that all are welcome here, or, we will love you, or all these things. And then like something bad happens later. And I thought, maybe I'm not ready yet. And I should probably keep
Yeah.
working, but I'm probably just not ready yet. And
Yeah.
I don't think Mark and his family are going to any church right now either. They're so connected to churches in that area because he did so much outreach with other churches that I think at this point it would be really awkward right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm just taking it slow.
Yeah, and I think that's really observant for you to know like you're not ready. And that's okay, because
I mean,
Um,
it took me 2 years to even get
yeah.
in the line, and the only reason I did it was because it was Easter, and I felt like, well, okay, I'm kind of ready, And now, again, I don't go faithful. I don't, you know what I mean? Like I go, but like I also don't have that guilt. Like I don't need to be there, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's how I was
so
going to my church because I knew I didn't have to go every Sunday. I went because I wanted to be with these people. And I'd gone about 3 years without regularly going anywhere because of the panic attacks. And then I finally found a place where I felt safe. So I hope I find another place where I feel safe again. I'm open to it now. It's been about a year since all that went down. I did write like a letter because I feel safe enough in my most recent church to like disagree with things that leadership does, which is good because I didn't feel that way in the IFB ever. We had a whole church split over whether or not we could listen to syncopated music in my IFB church in Dallas. It was a whole thing. Whether or not we could have syncopated worship music and whether or not one of the deacons was going to hell for listening to rap music. It was like, yeah, he showed the pastor, he's like, here's my rap music CDs. And the pastor was like, you're sinning. And it was like the whole thing. And so I've come a long way since then.
Yeah.
But I wrote like a letter to the head pastor and said, hey, like, here's the shift I'm seeing. And I was drawn to the safety of this church because of like my former pretty bad experiences. And here's why I felt safe. And here's the things that I feel like you were doing that were really good. And now that those things are changing, I worry it may not continue to be safe for people. And there's been some really significant leadership and church politics slash involvement with local politics changes that I don't think are great. And I honestly told him, like, and he said, we had our own reason for doing that, and having the mayor come and the superintendent come to speak. We meant well by it. And I was like, I totally get that. I was not comfortable. It felt like not separation of church and state and didn't feel good to me. But we still hugged. And then he said, come back and see us anytime, like when you're back in the area visiting or whatever.
Well, at least that's good. I mean, I feel like politics make people ugly, and that's just in general. And it's ruining friendships, relationships, all of it, and it's really evolved in that way of just like, nobody's able to talk about politics in the way that, it was probably 20 years ago versus now. These difficult conversations no matter what position you're in, and that is also the purpose of this, podcast, is to bring light to these difficult conversations that most are not ready for. And so to kind of like wrap the episode up, because my brain is not working because I don't even know what just happened. If you could literally, like, oh my gosh, if you could say something to younger Eleanor, like, looking like, if you're like, what, 12-year-old me is in front of me, what would you tell her?
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Because I really wanted to do things like become a journalist, and that was my dream. And now I get to like work with kids and teach them about journalism. And both of those things were dreams. I wanted to become an English teacher and I wanted to be a journalist, and I've gotten to do both.
That's
And
awesome.
I would also tell her that I didn't hurt Jesus the way I thought I did, and that I'm very loved in ways that I didn't even know. And don't take every single thing quite so seriously.
No, and I think that's, yeah, and I think that, I mean, I know for me, like, I have ADHD, even though I am on medicine. There's times where I take things too literal, and they're like, no, why are, it's just a joke. But I feel like in the IFB also, we are not conditioned to know what is a joke or not because everything's so serious. So I think it's kind of hard for the outside world to understand that. So well, Eleanor, thank you so much for being on today's episode and speaking with Jen and I. I know we're really looking forward to hearing the feedback, and yeah, so we thank you so much for being on here and just opening up and again talking about some difficult topics that most of us probably thought we would never talk about.
Now here's a sneak peek of next week's episode with our guest Wendy.
So thank you so much, Eleanor.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you for having me.
from my father. It was a Sunday. And he calls me in my dorm room and he's like, where were you between this and this last night? I went to sleep. And I'm like, why? What's going on? And he's like, well, listen, I want you to know everybody here is okay. The family's okay, but I've got something important to tell you. And I'm like, okay, what is it? He says, JT was murdered last night.
Murdered, as in like, or the
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, who was it? Did they ever find out?